Today I'd like to talk a bit about Deiform archetypes, as I call them, and the limitations of what is known as Interpretatio. This comes from the Roman or Latin word Interpretatio, meaning interpretation, as in Interpretatio Romana, which is a tradition of conflating all of the gods of the barbarians with that of the Greco-Roman tradition. And so it's also known as Interpretatio Graeca, which would be the Greek version, but also you can in modern circles it's used mostly among those trying to piece together all of the myths comparatively amongst mythologies of the past. And so we see both the Indo-European party doing this, as well as just people who are interested in European mythology and trying to say this god is equal to that god, and so forth. But in this video I'm going to explain how this is quite inaccurate to a large degree, and how trying to piece together god for god, goddess for goddess, the religions of Europe are really, it really has a lot of limitations to the accuracy of it, and also to the value of it as a whole. You see, there are various archetypes which give traits to the gods. See, all of the gods are really personifications of natural forces, but each god and each goddess has different attributes assigned to them, and over time these attributes change. It is my opinion that paganism doesn't actually need gods in it to exist, at least in essence it doesn't, because before there were gods, before there were symbols, which came about, say, in the Neolithic age with symbols, and then often idolism, the tradition of crafting images of gods, personifications of natural forces. That tradition only began in the Bronze Age, really, and in some places like Ireland, for example, it didn't begin until the Iron Age. And yet it would be crazy to think that in the Bronze Age people weren't religious in Ireland or in any other place, because of course they were. It is my opinion that many of the nature spirits, which you see in hunter-gatherer societies like the Native Americans and the Siberian peoples, before the Russians conquered them, these nature spirits are really the ancestors of the gods, and that the worship of these spirits and living your life in according to the natural way in hunter-gatherer times isn't all too different from a more organized pagan religion in say Iron Age society, which is much later. It was after civilization. It was after all of the changes in society, agriculture, as well as coming into contact with other sophisticated peoples and more sophisticated warfare, a more structured, organized lifestyle, which ties in with the development of societies anthropologically, from the band to the tribe to the chiefdom. In a likewise manner, religion developed alongside it, with the worship of nature spirits to the personification of those nature spirits, until eventually an organized, sophisticated religion in the chiefdom, which is, say, an Iron Age a society would exist like that, or say a medieval society in Northern Europe, for example in Ireland or England. Then of course we had states and kingdoms, which came after. But you'll hear a lot of people say, for example, I heard someone say in a video recently that Lu was related to Odin, who was related to Perun. This is it's so inaccurate, because Perun is obviously it comes from Peruns, which is the old Indo-European word, and this is related to the word for thunder. So Thor is Perun, essentially, because Thor is associated with chariots. He has a hammer. He's associated with lightning, or at least his name is Thunder, and his hammer is Mjolnir, which comes from the word for lightning, like in Russian Molnia means lightning. And also the Baltic god Peruns, which is the same thing, also associated with the hammer or the axe, and again chariots and lightning. And also the Gaulish god Taranis, who is again associated with chariots, and he is often depicted with a bolt of lightning in his hand, and his name also means thunder. So again, if you're going to interpretate the gods one for one, say this god is related to that one, it does not mean that this god in one religion is going to be equally important to another one there. For example, Lu, if he is to be interpreted in any way, should be associated with Mercury or Apollo. That's how the Romans associated it with him. He's a multifaceted god, more than just the giant killer or the chariot rider. He's also associated with the arts. He's Samuel Donn, equally skilled in all arts. And so Lugus was again associated with Mercury. The fact that Mercury is the chief god in the Celtic people does not mean that say the chief god to the Germanic people, which is Woden or Odin, is again the same god, or we're making a mistake here saying that one is more important than the other when really they all serve the same function in society. And that's the big mistake people make. Of course there are gods who can be associated with one another. For example, Taranis is actually etymologically related to Tuirean, who was a very minor character in Irish mythology in medieval times, or at least what the stories written down in medieval times about the Iron Age beliefs. He's mostly only known from the tragedy of the sons of Tuirean, but it focuses on his sons rather than on him himself. Even though his name means thunder. Of course, in modern Irish we say Tornach, but in Old Irish Tuirean was part of that root. To give another example of a place where we can obviously interpret god for god because they're etymologically related, Tyr in Germanic is related to Dievs in Baltic countries, which is related to Zeus in Greek, and Jupiter in Latin. But of course, Tyr in Germanic religion is a very minor character, much like how Tuirean in Ireland is minor, whereas Taranis is one of the main gods. So just because a god becomes less important over time, this mostly coincides with his change in function. It doesn't actually mean that people no longer value that archetype anymore. It's just that elements from his character have been supplanted into other gods. And so they're still worshipping the same natural forces. They're still living in the same way as their ancestors did thousands of years ago. But it's just how they symbolize it has changed. So for example, archaeologically, we don't actually have symbols as such, a motif representing a greater force, an exoteric motif, for example a swastika or a cross or a spiral or something like that, or triskele. We don't have these symbols in the Mesolithic, whereas once we enter the Neolithic, they start carving them everywhere. And people often think, well, this is all because the Indo-Europeans came and conquered. But again, that doesn't explain how the same nature spirits, again, and the same archetypes carry through from ancient times to the modern. Because if you said that was the case, you'd have to say that every time culture changed and new people came. And this is again the archaeological perspective, because you're looking at just the material people leave behind and not genetics and not linguistics and other studies. The fact of the matter is that most Indo-European languages in Europe actually have a huge amount of vocabulary from before Indo-European languages. So for example, in Ireland there was a thing called Jarnbele, or iron speech, which is said to be spoken in ancient times. And again, there are actually glossaries where it gives words like orn, which means stone, which isn't related to any other word that we even know about in Europe or anywhere else. And so it's most likely that there were ancient languages spoken here which came from these ancient peoples who were not wiped out, but rather who just changed over time, and then different populations would merge with each other. But it wasn't like the Indo-Europeans were non-European coming and conquering European societies. Another example is how in Swedish and other northern Germanic languages there's a huge amount of ancient vocabulary which is not of Indo-European origin, which obviously came from a native European language before that. Same thing can be said, for example, in the Basque people. The Basque people have their myths and their traditions, and their language is not related to any Indo-European language. And so this idea that that one god must be equated with another and so forth, it really jumps the gun. It really misunderstands that what the gods are is really just representations of archetypes, which are much, much older. And so each god may have their own characteristics and personality and iconography, but that changes over time. Symbols also can change over time, and it isn't related to conquest or conquering peoples, because if you look at, for example, let's take Celtic mythology. Cernunnos, or the horned god, is related to Conall Cernach in Irish mythology. But Conall Cernach only has one myth told about him. Well, he has other myths, but one main myth told about him, which is Tanbo Fliers, the cattle raid of Flidis, where there is a symbolism which ties him again with this horned god, because he's sort of a master of animals, and his role in taming the serpent is again part of it. In the same way that Cernunnos is always depicted as holding a serpent in his hand, and he has a boar beside him. In the same way, he becomes Conall Cernach, but again, he's not worshipped anymore. He's not that important anymore, despite the fact that most of the depictions a lot of the depictions in ancient Gaul depicted this horned god. He becomes less important later on. That is not to say that the medieval Irish were somehow not Celtic, or the ancient Celts were somehow not the ancestors of modern Irish people or whatnot. It's not to say that there was some foreign conquest which made these people start worshipping different gods, because that's just inaccurate. The changes just happen naturally over time. The biggest and most pertinent example is the idea of Odin, because I think a lot of people really over-exaggerate how much the archetypes of Odin are represented in single gods seen elsewhere. Of course, there are a lot of people, especially Americans, who don't really have much connection to the Greco-Roman tradition, obviously, and so they look for the northern barbarian religions for an understanding of paganism. And so the Germanic religion is the one with the most writing about it. So it's raining, so I'm just going to put up my hood. There's also thunder in the background. I don't know if you can hear it. They're quite suitable for the video which I'm making. And or is it? Yes, Odin. Yes, so they look at this Germanic religion for guidance. But the thing is, Odin, his archetypes are obviously represented in different religions, but Odin himself as a character is solely a Germanic god. Perun and Lu are different gods. Lu is related to Apollo, who is a god associated with the arts, associated with also with the interpretation of dreams and other things, and music as well. And Perun was just the chariot riding thunder god, that old archetype. The giant killer, protector of mankind, that sort of archetype. But again, that's not to say that Odin didn't exist in Slavic cultures. His archetypes are present there. Now I'm going to speak about Irish mythology quickly, because I'm running out of time for this video. In Irish mythology, there are these crow goddesses, led by Morrigan, the Great Queen. Now, the archetype of Morrigan I would equate with Freya's role as the Queen of the Valkyries, and these crow goddesses are really like Valkyries. They're choosers of the slain, and they went to harvest the dead to go to this Magmel, which we see in many stories. They also are related to the Fates, and they are symbols of man's lust for battle. Odin himself is also associated with crows and with harvesting the dead, and with choosing the dead, and that's just one example of an archetype in the Odin character, which is present in, say, in Irish mythology. As for sort of the All-Father archetype, the father of men, that sort of role there, that's again present in Irish mythology with the Dagda. So his real name was Olahar, or Yochud Olahar. Olahar means All-Father. And most of the gods are his sons, or a lot of them are anyway, including Bovjerg and others. And he's also he built his kingdom on the main burial mound in Ireland, which is Brunna Boyne. And so he's sort of a king of the dead. in that sense. And also he has the ability to end people's lives and bring them back to life. Another archetypes associated with Odin, for example, he has a pig, or a couple of pigs, much like Odin has a gestumblindi, which is it dies and it's able to regrow its meat and then feed people again and again. He also has a cauldron which whenever empties it immediately refills, and it can feed many people. Again, much like Odin in Valhalla. And there are many other examples. But to give more examples about Odin, for example, his spear, which is Gungir, the swaying one. This is a similar weapons in Irish mythology. On Fragarach, or the answerer, is Lu's weapon, which again never misses its target, much like Odin's spear. But of course, we have 3 different gods here already, and you could start adding more to the list. Gods should not be equated one for one, but rather their archetypes exist all over the European religions. And if one god in one religion is as important as a god in another religion, seemingly, it doesn't mean that the archetypes themselves are not present in other facets, that the people are not still worshipping the same religion, the same gods. It's just they've tallied up and they've divided the archetypes differently among their gods. That's all that it really is. And that's all I have to say about Interpretatio, and about something which a lot of people are misled by when they start researching paganism.